Jake has long wanted to escape the pressure and chaos of fast-paced city life. After months of planning, he finally chose a remote seaside village few people had ever heard of. Barely a dot on the map, it offered a secluded beach with waves crashing endlessly onto the shore. All he wanted was a few days of peace with only the sound of the sea. He arrived late in the afternoon. The beach in front of it was wide and empty of people. A light breeze was dragging the sand, and the waves it formed seemed to be whispering vague secrets. As Jake wandered along the deserted shore, he noticed a ruined lighthouse above the shoreline. On his way to the lighthouse, he saw a dilapidated, uninhabitable hut. When he approached the hut, a faded sign, barely legible in the setting sun, read, "Residence of the old lighthouse keeper." There was something eerie yet intriguing about the hut. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. Jake felt a curious tug and stepped inside without thinking. The air was filled with dust and neglect. The wooden floors creaked under his weight, and cobwebs covered the corners of the room. On an old, dilapidated table, there was a notebook with yellow pages open in the middle. Jake took a notebook and started reading. The diary described the strange fate of the lighthouse keepers who once lived there. Each had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only vague and frightening legends. It described how the soothing sound of waves at sea had turned into something more sinister, and eerie whisper that echoed throughout the night. Those wandering the beach in the dark were never seen again. The last part of the notebook was scrawled in bold handwriting. "If you hear the call of the waves at night, do not answer." Jake felt a shiver run up his spine as he read the notebook. He forced himself to laugh, trying to shake off the feeling of discomfort. "It's just an old ghost story," he muttered to himself. Still, despite his attempts to rationalize it, a strange tension settled in his chest. When he looked outside, he noticed that the sun had already set, casting long shadows on the beach. He decided to clear his mind by walking along the shore, hoping the fresh air would calm his nerves. When he approached the lighthouse, night had completely taken over him. Its faint, flickering light was hardly comforting in the vast darkness. The sound of the waves intensified as Jake got closer, but there was something unnerving about it. The rhythmic crashing of the water had taken on an unnatural quality, almost like the murmur of distant voices. As he tried to listen, he could have sworn the sea was calling his name. He stopped and looked towards the ocean. At first, the waves appeared to be rolling as usual, but then he noticed something moving beneath the surface. Dark shapes moved in the water. His pulse quickened, but he convinced himself it was nothing, maybe just a school of fish. However, the longer he looked, the more distinct, frightening the shapes took on. Figures rose from the depths, slowly drifting towards the shore. They resembled humans, but their appearance was grotesque. Their skin was swollen and rotten. Their eyes were sunken and lifeless. Seaweed clung to their bodies and shellfish covered their limbs. The figures came closer with each passing wave, as if the ocean was pushing them towards the shore. Jake froze in terror, unable to move as the figures got closer. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his legs were not obeying him. Panic finally overtook him, and he turned to run. Yet the sound of the waves had become something more. It was no longer just water crashing on the sand. There were whispers, soft but clear, saying his name over and over again. "Jake, ... why didn't you answer?" A voice seemed to ask, carried by wind and waves. The voice sounded familiar, but distorted in a way that made his skin tingle. He ran towards the hut, hoping to escape whatever horror was happening. But the beach had changed. The once peaceful shoreline was now littered with rotting figures drifting out of the water. They moved slowly, but inexorably, their dead eyes fixed on him, gasping for air. Jake stumbled as he ran, tripping over something buried in the sand. He crashed to the ground and looked down in horror to see a withered, rotting hand reaching out of the ground. He crawled backwards, barely managing to free himself as the hand retreated. But now he knew these creatures weren't just in the water. They were everywhere. His mind was racing. Lighthouse. Could it provide security? He looked towards her, but at that moment the light from the tower flickered and went out. Complete darkness covered the beach. The only sounds were the crawling movements of the undead approaching him, and eerie whispers echoing everywhere. Desperate, Jake returned to the sea, only to find it littered with dozens of rotting corpses, their faces twisted into grotesque shapes. They stared at him from the shore, seaweed and algae hanging from his bones. They moved forward slowly, the water rising behind them as if pulling them forward. The whispers grew louder. Jake felt their cold breath on his neck. He knew now that these were not just echoes of past tragedies. These were the voices of those who answered the call of the sea, and now it was his turn. With one last burst of energy, Jake tried to escape, but it was too late. Cold, rotting fingers wrapped around his ankles and pulled him toward the water. His breath caught in his throat as death's icy grip tightened around him. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The waves passed over him and dragged him into the black abyss. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him were pale, lifeless faces watching him from beneath the waves. The next morning, the beach was calm once again. Several fishermen were cruising the shoreline looking for a man who had gone missing during the night. All they found were footprints in the sand leading into the water. The footprints ended in the sea, and the beach remained silent as always, as if nothing had happened.